As Lena intimated, I have been here since pretty much the beginning. To the best of my knowledge, I believe this is my 27 and a half YAPC. Those of you that were in Granada, Spain, may remember why I count that as one half. Because one half of my leg went this way one day, and one half went that way. And I managed to break a hip at the time. Don't worry, I have more pleasant YAPC memories. Unlike a certain gentleman who also fell this morning, yesterday. And sorry again for your first time. All right. As the tagline says, international hacker mystery. Stealing that from Elaine, a long time, also a long time Perl user and member of the community. Right now, I am working with Clearbuilt, and I don't know what our hiring stance is. You can talk to me, and I will point you to our CEO or CFO who hadn't been here. So we can talk about that if you're interested. We are entirely remote, and I have been entirely remote from pretty much so far on 3 different continents, including at the very end of my tour, which at the time, we do all of our work over IRC, and at the time the tagline was, "So where is Jeff today?" Because I will be one day in Amsterdam, and the next day I'll be on the train to Berlin. So I had roughly a 3 to 4 month period where I was working remotely overseas, all the way including hacking Gangnam style. Seriously, I spent about 2 weeks in South Korea, in Seoul, and I was in Gangnam. It's actually a small province of Seoul. So a very wide background, and I am very glad to say that Perl has been a big part of my life since roughly 1994, I do believe, or thereabouts, right around the time of the Fortified transition. So, having been around for 27 years, I know where some of the skeletons are buried. This is from YAPC 1999, or as we call it back then, 99. I think maybe 4 or 5 people in the room are on this picture. You may recognize a lot of those. But I've been going to conferences for quite a while, and it was in 2002 or 2003 that I learned one of the most important rules of going to Perl conferences is to always practice a safe conference, especially around Damien. Yeah. Again, a few of you are here. A few of you in the picture are here. I shall not name names. I probably should. In terms of where I need to do one more thing before I let this roll, so I have a better idea of where I am on track. Okay, and the timing is wrong, that's okay. All right. As I said before, I have been pretty much all over the world doing Perl in places such as, Perl. Yes, this is a town. It is the tri-point between France, Germany, and Luxembourg. So it sits between 3 countries. One of very few places in the world that does that. It also sits about 20 miles south of Appach, or APACH in Germany. So Perl and Apache are not that far apart, even in the real world. As I said before, I've been doing this all over the world, and one of the nice things, and one of the things that I had to abandon as part of my quest when I started working in 2009 overseas was my parrot. But I found a couple of months ago a parrot cafe in Asakusa, Tokyo. Yeah, so I have video with Sarah, but too much tweeting, too much noise. I have no idea what the bird on top of my head trying to nest is. I looked up, I think it is some sort of cassowary or something akin to a grouse. Very evil-tempered. But a lot of lories down there. But we probably should move on to more of the actual meat of the talk before I go too far. My premise is that, yes, we are all defective. We are all defective programs. We all write defects in our programs. Even according to Wikipedia, in my research about 2 days ago, the best known program and actually the program that inspired the original bug bounty, because this author, after he released it, offered a bounty of 1 cent doubled every time for every bug he found. And I think we are right now up to a $327 bounty as of 2014. And in point of fact, most of you probably don't know that Jason Dominus, has a check from Newth. I think he got the 1,024 or $10.24 check. I hadn't had a chance to ask him that, but more connections to Perl. Yeah. Yeah. So, right now in the industry, the current standard for bugs is bugs per KLOC, 1,000 lines of code. Right now, the average across all languages is actually pretty consistent. So what language you use actually doesn't matter too much with how many defects you write. With C#, it's about 0.65. With C# it's about 0.72. With C, it's whatever the figure is there. I'm not going to mail them out, but I think it's 0.83 lines per bugs per 1,000 lines. Perl is down here in negative territory, but to be fair, I also included closure at a record negative 0.28 lines. So you can't do too much about the bugs per line of code, because after all, we are human. But one thing that you can do is write less code. By that, unfortunately, as we probably all know about here, I don't mean actually physically typing out less code. By that, what I mean is the discovery process that we all do when encountering a new problem, and you must do more work to discover, and then as you write more work, you do less and less code and remove things. So therefore, along the way, removing bugs. Now, by way of a case study, a couple of months ago, well, no, it was about a month ago. Again, we work over IRC. So I got a note when I woke up that morning saying, hi, from my manager, also currently CEO, saying, hi, can you check out this code repository and look at calc.pm and see what you think about this. So I sat down, took a brief look, and I've been doing this sort of thing for a long time. So what I wanted to do, so for me, I sort of shortcut this down to roughly 30 seconds of looking at the code and saying, okay, I need this and this and this to do the work. And I need to probably check on this and that. So I have enough experience that I can sit down and shortcut a lot of what a more junior programmer would do. And what I want to do was go into a little bit of that and how I'm thinking about the code and what habits I formed along the way to help me do that and keep down overall the number of lines of code, the cognitive workload, more importantly, the amount of work that you have to do, because as a programmer, we all know that we are faced daily with learning. Daily in our heads, we walk around with or at least I do, I should say. We all walk around with an idea of an idea of how Perl 5 and 6 will behave, or at least how Perl 5 will behave, how to write code in that, what the libraries that you can use are, what JavaScript libraries you have out there, underlying C code, how to bind that. It's all floating around somewhere up in our heads, and adding more workload to that just makes your already stressful task of trying to write out code more stressful. So, this task was fortunately very much right in my alley, although I don't think that Mike knew at the time that I had written recently 2 or 3 tools that did exactly what they were talking about. It's always fun when you get a project and you can say, well, I did almost exactly that last week. You don't get a chance to do that very often, so I took that and reveled in it. In my case, I had just done this in Perl 6, so I showed an example of that, knocked that out about 3 minutes, and then went back on to doing a more conventional Perl 5 version. So, we have here a whole bunch of dynamically created attributes with a name and a default value. Name, default value, and a bunch of types. So I shortcut the process all the way down to just asking, just a quick note saying, hey, just so you know, these are probably, I'm guessing these are entered by hand. Yeah, because I happened to work at one time with a fairly infamous cadre of Perl people, and he is somewhere here. He was there at DataBuild, along with a lot of former and burned out Perl people. So I have an advantage of being an industry insider on that. So my first thought when I looked at this text was we have a whole listing of radius and spring torsion and leaf height and width. This is all for rolling doors that you see on the back ends of loading docks in restaurants and large buildings. So pretty dull stuff, but when you get down to it, what's happening is the idea here is that we have a bunch of constants for radius and slat height and width, and then a bunch of calculations we need to make. So I've done this sort of thing before, and I decide to shortcut things to just go directly to, all right, we need to use this tool and that tool. But along the way, one of the first things I want to make point of is that even over IRC, you need to actively listen, and when you are listening, you need to be able to quiet that little part of back of your head that's already forming the next response. Because if you're like me, your mind's already running ahead of this and saying, I need this, and I need this, and I need this. You ask that question, and you're already thinking about, okay, I need to do that, and I need to do that. But one of the things that has taken me a long time to do, and it can be hard, is to consciously quell my desire to think about what I'm doing and not actually listen to what the response is. Working over IRC, that makes it a lot easier. Whereas if you're in person and talking face to face, you need to get done with, you want to get back to your meeting, you want to get back to your desk, so you're already thinking about other things. the important part of making active listening a habit is to push back that part of your brain that is getting ready to do more work, to push that back and listen, because who knows, you might learn something. So my first question there was, hey, this looks like someone's entering formulas out of a book, which is common in the industry. If you've ever watched early Mythbusters episodes, Adam Savage walks around with a tiny black book in his hand, which I don't have a copy of right now, unfortunately. It is the engineer's Bible. It tells you formulas for how to determine radii of steel, how to determine the volume of a cone, how to determine the radius of a pipe, what tubes will fit in, what threads will fit onto what tubes, etc. Very much a Bible, and it's written down as a set of formulas. So my thought, I had already shortcut this in the back of my head, so pushing forward, I said, all right, I've seen this before, and if you are talking to people out there that are typing things in from a book, they will type in things like circumference depends upon area, depends upon radius times tau. Tau is 2 pi. Circumference depends upon radius, and they may enter later on another formula. Radius equal circumference divided by tau. And that's fine to enter formulas, but if you have a list of those formulas together and you want to compute things, then you have a circular dependency between the circumference and the radius and tau. So once you compute the circumference, you have to recompute the radius and recompute the circumference, and repeatedly in a loop, which is not quite right. But if you have more complex formulas, that will happen. So that is in the back of my mind, going through this process. So I want to make sure that, because it's possible that this could already be done and be in some other form. So asking questions and listening to responses. Now, another thing here, and this is a quote from Anathema that I happen to very much like, and describes a lot of how I tend to do work, and why I probably am a little bit slower than a lot of people when trying to catch up to things. What I tend to believe overall programming is more of damage control, because we all have to deal with users, and users don't always do what you want to do. Users don't do what you expect. So a big part of the time is figuring out, okay, what does the user want to do? Make that easy, and then when they do things you don't expect, try to catch them and behave in a rational way. There are, in fact, programming languages out there. I wish I remember the name. I think it's called CLU, C-L-U, that actually requires you to enter, and actually requires you to write exception handling for every possible exception. So in that way, I want to try to go down all possible branches, and that's what I'm doing as part of the overall code planning. Now, another thing that's important when you're doing remote work, and very handy, is that you can control your environment. So I do my best to keep things at a minimum to keep distractions down. Again, reducing cognitive workload. If I don't, usually I'm at a coffee house around the corner and have my headphones screwed in, have my earbuds screwed in, listening to Queen or something in the background, on loop, blocking out noise so I have no other distractions. Again, keeping the cognitive workload down. And I tend to run in a full screen view with like 3 or 4 different terminals in Vim. If you're not familiar with Tmux, I highly recommend that you take a look. If you've ever used Screen, it is the next generation and incredibly flexible. So that's what I tend to use, flipping between entries and flipping between pages and flipping between files. I've been doing this long enough that my first job was actually programming on a VT100. So that's why you had to use arrow keys and such to move around your 80 by 24 screen. So that's how I work with that. Now, I'm sitting here and writing code, working on things, and listening to Queen, so obviously the first function name happens to be whatever comes up in my playlist. Completely random. Right now, I really don't care what the function names are, what the function variables are. I can clean that up later. Right now, I'm in the flow, trying to sit down, write out methods, write out some sort of method name, whatever works. Now, another thing that I tend to try to do, again, after a long time programming, is try to make things easier for the next person to come along, because usually that's you, especially in a Perl environment where you may be the only Perl hacker there. I've been down that road, and the one thing that I don't want to have to do is try to spend too much time reading my code from 5 months ago, figuring out what I did. So I try to keep things keep things simple. This code here is nothing special. I'm mostly right now looking at the form of the code. One habit that I've gotten into over just very recently, actually over just the last 6 months to a few years, is getting into things such as painting and drawing, and working on something that is not computer related, but technically not computer related. But I find that the way an artist thinks is not that far from what a coder will think. Because if you're looking at a work of art, and I'll go over here a little bit. What you're looking for as an artist is one thing you're looking for is both the positive spaces inside your object and the negative spaces that surround the object. They're both equally important. And for instance, if you've ever tried to draw a face or try to draw a mountain and felt really badly about that, the trick that they recommend is, instead of drawing my outline here along a face, you draw instead the outline from outside and look at this space and draw the space behind me with the sponsors and trace the white and not trace my face. It's a hack, very much, but it actually works. Instead of tracing the face visually here, you trace the boundaries of the face, and from that you get an outline, and that will look usually a lot better if you trace the outside. It's a weird psychological thing, but it actually works. I don't have any samples of my own right now, because usually what I tend to do these days is I'm rather addicted to the adult coloring books. I'll admit it. So I don't do that much tracing, but I do a lot of filling in on these things. So we have these, as I intimated beforehand, we have a list of equations that we are trying to sit down and parse through. One of the other things, that I had to do to slow down and step back a little bit on this and say, okay, how would I go through and do that task of actually parsing the equations and turning them into something actually worthwhile? Well, I could take one of the equations over here, the text radius times the text radius star tau, and if I'm lucky, all I have to do is add dollar signs to that, to dollar sign radius and dollar sign tau, and evaluate the code. It might work out, it might not. The odds are that it will, and the language we have right now set up is simple enough that that would work. But I want to be a little bit more flexible and think down the road, so I chose to use parse rectisent from Damien, simply because I happen to be very familiar with that from a while ago, so it took some time. Now, getting back to the code, I talked before about negative and positive space, and one of the things that you might notice between the versions of code here that I'm writing is they all have roughly the same shape. On the side, there's a little bit of a glitch there. You go outside, a little bit of a dip in, and back in. But what I'm looking for now, I see this more as an artist than I do as a coder. I see the shape and think, okay, this shape is a good shape. The shape is a bad shape. It's much more common in languages like Lisp, where you have a very regular shape with all the parents, so it looks very smooth on one end and smooth on the other side. If your code looks very ragged in Lisp, you're probably trying to write in a functional style, or rather, sorry, in a procedural style, and Lisp more encourages a functional style. So if you're looking for, so being more of an artist and going out and say taking a class on drawing or even online will let you see the shape of things better, and you'll be able to take your code and see, okay, is this the right shape or not, and be able to see, be able to compare just the shapes. You don't have to worry about the names. You don't have to worry about what it actually does. Just doesn't look like the right shape. At least that's how I found that I look when I'm sitting down at a screen and I'm writing along. I don't so much care about, I don't care about the names, the operations. I care about the overall look of the code these days. So I'm trying to keep things simple, so I don't end up in this situation. This way I have a better memory. This way I have simpler code to work with. I may have more code, but it'll be simpler, and I can look at that very quickly and see what's going on. When you're in your first stages of your career, you tend to, especially in Perl, and especially in the early days of Perl, we have a few people up here talking about JAFs and whatnot. JAPH, just another Perl hacker. This was a big thing back in the early days where you would try to come up with the most convoluted way possible of writing a string. And that reputation has stuck with us for the last 20 years. So I'm very pleased to see Perl 6 taking a clean break and actually writing, and there being clean code out there from the start of the new language. Now, in terms of, from art, we want to kind of move into with science. There is relevance, believe it or not. Those of you that are aware of the discoveries made by the LIGO Observatory, specifically of gravity waves. What this is there are 3 facilities scattered throughout the world that look for gravity waves. And what that is is when, say, two large black holes, such as the large blobs on top, are spinning around each other, and eventually they merge. Basically, you have two rubber bands colliding, snapping, and releasing a tremendous amount of energy. One of these collisions releases more energy than all the stars in the parent galaxy in a split second. Under a third of a second, the merging of the black holes creates enough energy that it distorts space. So what happened with the first target there is that 10 billion years ago, two black holes merged, and that gravity wave took 10 billion years to travel and ripple through our detectors, ripple through space, moving things very, very, very slightly into detectors here on Earth. And how the detectors work is a bit of a miracle in itself, but I don't really want to get into that too much. What I want to talk about here is testing and how the LIGO people do testing. Most of you have seen, or that follow this, have seen some of the predictions and some of the results of LIGO. What they don't really talk about is there is a second team in the background whose sole job is to create false positives for the LIGO people to analyze. They get all sorts of input, and LIGO is sensitive enough that they deal with on the order of small fractions of a wavelength of light. So any disturbance in their seismic event, a truck driving by, someone putting a book down by a sensor, will trigger it. So they have a separate, so there is a team of scientists working on the project to analyze the waves and make sure that they are false positives. Some of it is easy to do because some of it, if you look for pulse, you have to make sure that you correlate that with another pulse on a different facility. Some of that is easy to do. Some of that isn't so easy. Because the team actually goes into the waveguide data and starts playing with that as well. But only after the detection happens, so you get actual clean data. So what they're acting like is essentially a chaos monkey, if you remember that from a few years ago. Going in and deliberately injecting false positives and coming up with new ways to find false positives. And so in terms of testing. So I have code. So I have code beforehand. I mentioned that I want to go in and test. So these days I kind of take that as my lead in order to figure out how to test code. So when I run into an issue like that, again, I'm knocking back cognitive workload. So I clear the decks, get rid of the old terminal, do a get reset, close my screens, and just create a completely new area to test with. Just a simple single directory to play with my test scripts. Just to be able to clear the deck, clear my mind, and have a completely clean base to start from. Generally what I run is, I don't have one open right now, but what I run like 3 different panes. One is for Vim for editing. I'm that old school. One is for just doing prove on my code, and one is for Git. I'm sure you all have your personal ways to do that, and what I would encourage you to do is, once you find a habit that works for you, just stick with it. It's not worth the stress of trying to change. It's not worth the stress of trying to learn a new editor, unless, if you're doing that for fun, that's fine. And I have been working with Vim for long enough that I tend to go out and every few weeks try to find a new key binding, find a new feature, like add in. The whole continuing development thing. So, one thing that we talked about here we talked about beforehand, is art. And that's how I kind of see, that's how I kind of see a lot of the testing work. So here, this is Metamorphosis by Escher. Yeah. So it starts at the beginning over here with a vaguely Islamic design, and morphs in with tessellation, and that back in with closing thing into I'm not sure what that. I know what I would call the hat, but I will not call it that name right now. So what I look at in this case is the parallel between Metamorphosis and my code. There's a whole bunch of irregular stuff at the start. There's a use test more, there's plan, there's a block to create subtests, and then things get more regular as I go on in. So as you go from the left hand to the right hand side, you're getting out of chaos into more order. So I try and make sure that my tests at least try to follow this plan. With using subtests and narrowing things down that way, if you use, say, test class, which I had a little hand helping with. If you use test class or some other testing method, that's fine. I'm just showing how to do this sort of work with basic test more. But the important thing here is the overall shape of the code. I don't, when I do this sort of thing, when I do this sort of work, it may tend to annoy my fellow coworkers, because I will commit junk to your repository, and as long as it has the right shape, as far as I'm concerned, I can work with that, and I'll put that there. It may not compile, but as long as I have all the pieces in place, I can work on that. Now, we talked about shape beforehand, and you'll see here, we have the subtest going in, and then we get pulled out into the right margin. This is another habit of mine, to pull all of my dies and wars and debugs and prints all the way to the left-hand side, because humans tend to be very good at pattern recognition. So we see the first line there, okay, ride my bicycle with an empty brace, and then we get interrupted with the pattern. We tend to be very good at pattern recognition and finding when patterns break. So instead of leaving your debugging code in line, leaving your warns, leaving your comments in line, push out where the R complex of your brain will pick on that faster than you will, and ignore that as a blind spot. Another way to knock down on cognitive workload. When I'm in the mode sitting down writing tests, I happen to find that it is really similar to when I am doing glassblowing, which is something, this is one of mine. It's by no means a Chihuly. I will grant that right now. I did this for about 10 years back in when I was living in Boston and San Francisco, and got to the point where I could do goblets and vases, much thinner than this. But in terms of an art, it is about as far from computing as you can get, as far as I'm concerned. Yes, you do have to deal with the hot furnace. Yes, the glass there was previously screaming at about 2,100 degrees. Fahrenheit. And when you're working with that, with your tools, you have your, you'll notice that I have very little hair left on that side of my hand. Burned off from fun days. But I find that this is completely opposite because because in computing, you can sit there and tweak your code all day. You can change this, change that variable, change the layout. Glass doesn't work that way. Glass doesn't like to be handled that way. You have basically one shot, and basically one shot to work with it. And what I would encourage you to do is at least look at a few videos online. Say, I'll play just a quick section of this here. This is from the Chrysler. Don't worry, no audio needed.
Color is glass gray.
That's what it looks like, and I'll jump over here to where she's.
The bubble is created with your own breath by blowing through the end of the blowpipe.
And that's how you work with it. You just inflate that, and and this is all done live right there. You have one shot to create your piece, and you move very, very fast. It's the one reason I think it's one reason that I got as much exercise as I did when I was living back in the States. But I like the overall. But I just like it as an art form. In fact, I tried to get people to join me over here for a session, but I could not find a place that did that.
And it's soaked in water.
So finishing up. Okay, I will skip that because that was one of my work. But more importantly, I'm keeping us here from the important thing. This is from 2004. I'm keeping you from the last talk and the beer. So I am about to the end of things, and thank you. If you have questions if you have questions on where to go to do glass blowing, what some of my other passions are, what I do, by all means, feel free.
Typically, historically speaking,
and otherwise, I don't see too many hands out here, so I think we're pretty much good. All right, let's call it here. Thank you very much. Namaste.